Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some ProRevenge. Before we start, did you know that KCC now has a Shorts channel? Check out KCC Shorts listed at the top of the description down below for under 1 minute Ask Reddit questions and answers and short stories. Our first story today comes to us from Alert Illustrator 6922. I got one company shut down and 2 more fined by the state of North Carolina. Let's jump right in. To get started, I, for the past 4 to 5 years, have been working as state certified security for several companies. I tend to make it about a year before being completely done with the BS at the company before moving on to the next one. My story begins at my first security job ever. We shall call the company First for the purposes of this post. I have never done security before, but my brother has been working in the field and helps me get the job at First. North Carolina has laws that regulate this profession and require all field employees to go through state certification for unarmed security if working without a pew-pew, or both the unarmed and armed certifications if working with a pew-pew. This will be important later. I went through this training and passed my unarmed certification just fine. It is a pass-fail system, and began my new job enforcing rules for low-income apartment complexes. Oof. After about 6 months, I got a promotion, a whole 50-cent pay raise, and a lot of new responsibilities. These new responsibilities often required about 4 to 10 hours of paperwork, phone calls, and other manager duties that could not be done on-site at the apartment complexes, per company regulation, but could be done at home using Dropbox or other websites. After about 9 months, First decided they wanted to arm all managers, and we went through the class and I passed again. Then, after about a year, the other managers and I started realizing that we should be paid more, now $11.50 an hour, and hadn't been receiving most of our off-site 4 to 10 extra hour of work pay each week. We started conversations with the owner, Billy, not close to his name at all. He refused us extra pay and claimed he didn't pay us for the extra time because it wasn't approved by him first. I know this isn't malicious compliance, but cue it anyway. We all started tracking our unpaid work, making sure to get every second of extra work approved, or most of the time not. Also, we only worked when approved. This caused First paperwork to die a slow death from neglect. Then, after about 3 months of this, we all had found new jobs and quit on the same week, leaving him with no managers. After my time at First, I now had a glowing review from my previous manager, who quit along with the rest of us, and a bit over a year of experience both as a regular guard and a manager. This allowed me to get a good job at a new company. We shall call this company Second for this post. Second was much better than First. I was brought on as a regular guard with mentions of a possible promotion after 6 months. Also, my pay was $12.50 an hour. Woohoo! I worked there for about a month and then informed them that my unarmed and armed certification received at First would be expiring within 60 days, and I would need to recertify before it expired. This is very common in my field because the certifications only last 1 year before needing to be recertified. In return, I got vague promises of upcoming classes. 60 days came and went and I hadn't been scheduled for a class, despite reminding them every couple of weeks. I would like to say that I stopped working when it expired, but I didn't. I needed the money, and they kept promising classes. After about 3 months of this, my old manager from First, the one that recommended me to Second, contacted me and told me that she was starting up a new company and asked if I would want to come on board. Due to a few minor problems with Second, as well as my violation of both state and federal laws working armed with an expired certification, I jumped at the opportunity. I put in my 2 weeks notice and informed Second that I couldn't work for those 2 weeks due to the violations regarding my certificates. State law requires them to pay me during this time because it is 100% on the company to get me trained. My start at Third, not the real name. During my 2 weeks notice, I signed up with Third and they put me through my required classes. After that, I started. Work was hard. We only had one contract, but that contract was 24/7 and there were only 2 of us. It would be me working for 12 hours from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, and my coworker working nights, then rinse and repeat. We did this for about 2 weeks until a few new employees came on board and evened out the hours. I worked there for about a year. During this year, Third had some bumps in the road financially speaking. Occasionally, I wouldn't be paid my entire dues, but it was always fixed with on my next paycheck. So despite these rough patches, I kept on. The owners didn't know everything they needed to about running a business and were learning through trial and error. We had some awful Craigslist employees and almost lost our one contract on multiple occasions due to the awful employees. Despite these issues, we had a small, good core of employees. After a year of this, I was promoted, but strangely, my pay didn't go up. In hindsight, I should have been able to predict the future from this. I liked having the manager role officially, but unofficially, I had been doing all the extra work since Third's inception, so no real changes to my duties. After all this, it happened. Cue the beginning of the end. The owners decided to not pay us for lunches. This seems small, but for me, this meant about 5 hours a week of pay loss. Keep in mind, we could not leave site for lunch and had to sit at the desk and answer the door every 5 minutes or so to perform searches of guests entering the building. I informed the owners that it violated labor law to do this, and most of the employees ate very quickly to minimize downtime anyway. What we were doing is defined as on-call lunches. This means that we may be interrupted during our lunch at any time to do work-related tasks. On-call time has to be paid. I fought with the owners for about a month and realized they were not going to change. So I started digging into company records to see if there were any other cost-saving measures being used. I also kept very close track of my missing pay. To my horror, I found a few. We had a few employees that were not ARM certified. The full class is about $500 per employee and is required by the state. The lunch thing that violated federal labor laws, and there were also a few instances where earned overtime was pushed to the next week so the company wouldn't have to fork out time and a half. This violated our employee contracts as well as federal labor laws. I got all this information written up into a 5-page packet that included plain text of the violations, legal text of the violations, the legal code numbers being violated so Third could easily look them up, as well as legal fixes for these issues. These fixes were put in simple terms. 1. Pay the owed back pay and stop further violations, the cheapest option. 2. Be sued sometime down the road by an employee or group of employees, potentially the most expensive option. 3. Report themselves to the Labor Commission and Certification Board. The state will work with companies to help them fix their issues and often waive fines and fees to ensure the company fixes itself. 4. Be reported to both the federal government and state boards. My personal favorite and very expensive. I honestly didn't think they knew and would jump at the chance to fix their issues. I had a meeting with the owners and explained everything. To my horror, they knew everything. At this point, I started looking for new work and finally found it. Now at Fourth, they put me into the certification system, and to my horror, it turns out that I had been working 2.5 years without a certification. Both Second and Third never bothered paying the $14 fee to have my records updated. For a bit of info, I am responsible for informing my employer when my expiration dates are coming up and passing the classes. That is it. It is completely on the company to do the rest of the legwork. I was pissed. I started getting all my records in order from both Second and Third. While doing that, I remembered First that had cut my pay for over 200 hours of unapproved work. I decided to add that to my case. So I filed both First and Third's violations with the Federal Labor Board, along with all my records. Then I went and filed Second and Third with the North Carolina Certification Board. I presented all my records and wrongdoings, working uncertified. They understood and told me I had done everything in my power at the time and would not be held accountable. After about a year, I finally was told what happened to First, Second, and Third. The federal government went through First and Third's records and found everything I had submitted, and more. First was able to afford the fallout and paid about $50,000 to past employees, as well as some fines. Third was fined around $300,000 and had to reimburse all the employees wronged. These payments were the owed amounts, plus a fine equaling 200% owed amount to each employee wronged. Then, the State Certification Board fined both Second and Third around $10,000 per employee who worked unarmed and was given a stern warning. In the end, First was fined $50,000 plus fines, unsure of the total amount. Second was fined $70,000 and is now on the crap list of the Certification Board. Third was fined over $600,000 and went out of business, still waiting for them to cut my check. I was informed later that I could have sued them and gotten more. However, I didn't want personal satisfaction as much as I wanted them to learn their lesson. I feel that they did. I love how a security company that's supposed to be enforcing rules doesn't know how to follow rules themselves. We do hear a lot of stories like this from the security industry though, makes you kinda wonder about it. Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our next story today comes to us from Micro Giant, the most expensive way ever to get the police involved. Let's jump right in. My friend and I had a first floor condo in what had previously been a nice complex. Unfortunately, over time, the couple who lived above us, hereafter designated AA for Angry Alcoholic and AAG for Angry Alcoholic Girlfriend, began drinking heavily. Or maybe they just got louder about their drinking. Nearly every night became a massive screaming match between them. They'd stay up until 2 a.m. shouting at each other at the top of their lungs. Then, one of them would put on music at top volume to drown out the other. Their taste in music wasn't actually bad, but when it's 2 a.m. and my floor is vibrating, it's a problem. Sometimes they'd even take their fight out into the parking lot, just to be sure all the neighbors were treated to a detailed explanation of who had cheated on who recently, both, and who was threatening to dump who and leave right now. Neither of them ever actually left, they just went out to their car and threatened to loudly. Then in the mornings, he would work on his car in the carport right outside our front door. As far as I can tell, all he did was sit there and rev the engine for, it seemed, hours on end. I have no idea when he slept. Maybe while we were at work, we and other neighbors complained to the condo board, who issued a warning, which Angry Alcoholic and Angry Alcoholic Girlfriend ignored. Eventually, the condo board started fining them, but Angry Alcoholic found a genius solution: just don't pay the fine. All the condo board could do was, eventually, put a lien on Angry Alcoholic's condo. But that would only become a problem for him when he sold the place. Apparently, they couldn't actually foreclose on him, or maybe they just didn't want to go to the trouble. Trying to talk to him directly was useless. If we managed to catch him during a rare moment of sobriety, he'd just kinda blow us off. But if we caught him while he was drunk, he'd get pretty threatening and was then even louder for a few days. We even tried calling the police, but they weren't really interested unless he actually crossed the line into a felony. They gave him a few warnings, which he also ignored. Maybe if he'd actually beaten me or one of my other neighbors up, they'd have done something, but none of us felt like getting into a fight to find out. Plus, there was always the risk that the cops would arrest everybody involved in the fight on general principles, and none of us wanted an arrest record. Eventually, my wife and I decided to sell our condo and move, for multiple reasons that definitely included Angry Alcoholic and Angry Alcoholic Girlfriend. Because of the timing of our move, our realtor wound up actually showing the condo while we were home a couple of times, and we discovered that one of the potential buyers was a city police officer, her husband, and their 1-year-old baby. I guess their old place was too small now that they had a kid. Unfortunately, their offer was $3,500 below the top offer. After talking it over, we told our realtor to accept their offer anyway and we'd just eat the loss. So Angry Alcoholic and Angry Alcoholic Girlfriend had a cop move in directly below them. I'm Facebook friends with a couple of our old neighbors, and in the 6 months since we moved, Angry Alcoholic has been arrested multiple times and had his car impounded at least once. Apparently, he's now trying to be quieter, but that only lasts until he gets drunk and then he's screaming again. And his new downstairs neighbor has long ago had enough of his crap and does not appreciate it if he wakes up her kid. And I guess she also doesn't appreciate it if he shouts at her. He's in an obnoxious neighbor war with a cop and he's losing badly. Hopefully soon, he'll wind up in jail for longer than a couple of days. So you mean to tell me that the condo HOA was letting this go on? I mean, that's not how HOAs work from all the other stories we've had here. Another observation on this one, it's interesting how things finally got dealt with by the police when it started inconveniencing one of their own. I'll just leave it at that. The comment section on this one's gonna be pretty interesting. Our last story today comes to us from Mr. Tyrone the Cat. Should have just paid the rent. Let's jump right in. So this is a story about my parents around 7 or 8 years ago when I was barely leaving elementary school. I was really young and my parents kept my sister and I in the dark at the time, but they later told me the gist of what happened. First thing first, my parents owned 2 houses. They decided to keep the old house when they bought a new one so they could rent it out. The old house was in a decent area, but on the edge of the not-so-good part of the city, so it attracted a lot of the wrong crowd when my parents put it up for rent. After the horror story of the first tenant used a dumb loophole in our state in order to live there for almost 6 months rent-free, my parents found a single woman with temporary foster kids who was interested. Let's call her Bad Tenant. She seemed really nice at first, housing kids who needed a home and selling homemade tacos from her taco cart. My parents did a background check and see that her income from the state for the kids should cover the rent and figure her side hustle would help her out. Everything is signed and she moves in with her kids immediately. Now the wrongdoing. Bad Tenant had decided to take in a lot more kids given that our house was larger than our previous one. I have nothing against these kids, and they are just victims, but they tore that house to shreds. I remember countless times of going with my dad to the house and handing him tools while he fixed a variety of broken things, especially the toilets and general plumbing. Eventually, my dad had enough and told her that all the maintenance he was doing was, 1, not required, since the house was in perfect condition when she moved in and was not due to anything on my parents' part. We planned on moving back after my sister finished high school, so we replaced anything we thought would break and repainted it. 2, caused by the way too many kids in the house. This pissed off Bad Tenant, and she stopped paying her rent. Just some backstory, my dad is a fairly reasonable guy, and I've never seen him give attitude to anyone, let alone yell. My mother, however, is your typical Hispanic mother who doesn't take crap from anyone. That being said, when my mom took me with her to pick up the rent, where Bad Tenant said some nasty things to my mom, she kinda lost it. The screaming match was awful, but there was no physical contact on either end, and it ended with Bad Tenant basically stating she wasn't going to pay a cent until my dad came back, and continued doing all the maintenance he was doing prior. Bad Tenant was dead serious about this, and my parents had to take her to court. I later learned she only did this in order to stay at the house a little longer without having to pay rent. My parents were pissed. This was the second time a tenant had gotten away without paying rent. At this point, I need to say I truly love my dad, but my mom is the most dedicated person I know. If she wants something, she will find some way to get it. She was born and raised in Central America, traveled all the way to the US, went to school, learned English on her own, supported her brothers, and worked all the time. That being said, my mom was not going to let this woman take advantage of us. The first thing she did was head to child services with photos of the house condition, courtesy of my father, who always took photos of the house when he went over for the maintenance. They looked it over and thanked my mother profusely for the evidence and told them they would look into it. Next, my parents got a lawyer who collected all the photos we took before she moved in to prove the house's condition before she moved in. Now, I wasn't in the courtroom, but from what my dad told me, it was the most satisfying thing he's ever seen. Bad Tenant's lawyer was a huge joke and was obviously the cheapest and most inexperienced lawyer around. Bad Tenant and her lawyer basically tried lying for every point they made, where my dad and his lawyer simply pulled out a photo or message, completely destroying their argument. Eventually, Bad Tenant was contradicting herself and the judge rules in my parents' favor. Now, my parents knew that they were not going to see a dime from the lady, given that she no longer could house kids. Whoops. It also turns out she was using her mother's name in order to house even more kids, which explains why they were given to her to the start. So she was going to answer to that too. Double whoops. Lastly, just to put the cherry on the cake, my parents put a lien on her taco cart, so she couldn't make money that way either. Effing triple whoops. This might not be enough for this sub, but you need to understand, my parents are hardworking people who made something of themselves when given nothing. Piece of crap people shouldn't take advantage of hardworking people. It sounds to me like Bad Tenant was hiding things and maybe even lying to her lawyer, because even the bad lawyers won't generally try the make crap up and hope we don't get caught school of law. I honestly can't even imagine how much BS public defenders have to put up with. Definitely not a job for this guy. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.